Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 289 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Confidence in Lyme, an interview with the amazing Sarah Corlis. My name is Cassidy.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
I have known Matt and Rich for about 2.5, 3 years now. When they discovered me on social media, I have had Lyme for the past 10 years. I got it when I was 14. I've tried almost every medicine in the book, from antibiotics, homeopathics, herbals, Chinese medicine, 2 PICC lines. I had the fatigue, the joint pain, brain fog. I was paralyzed for 9 months, and I am still here to tell my story today. So I'm so excited to be here and have you all listen to Sarah's story about not only her journey, but her 2 children's journeys as well. So without further ado, here is Sarah Corlis. Hello, Sarah. Welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited and a little nervous.
Don't be nervous. We're all friends here. It's so great to meet you. Let's dive into your story. So I know you are Irish, but you are currently living in Georgia. Can you tell us a little bit about young Sarah growing up? What was that like?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Dublin, about 6 miles outside of the city. Normal childhood. I was very studious kid, and I was quite athletic. I did field hockey was my main thing I did. And also, I wasn't a great student, but I was a little lazy about it, but I did get good grades, and I was quite determined to go to university and have a great career and all that kind of stuff. So really, back then, I felt like my biggest asset was my brain. I always was like, whatever else, is going on in my life, I'm smart. So that's cool, So I'm going to be fine. I'm always going to be able to work hard, achieve things, because I'm going to be able to use my brain, and that's it. And I had no fear of working hard. I'd, worked various different crappy jobs along the way, because when I came out of university in Ireland, the economy was really crap. So most people had overeducated for the jobs that they did. So my big thing was languages. I loved languages. So in high school, I studied French, German, Latin, Irish, English, and then went on to university and took up Spanish. So I got a degree in Spanish and French. But I was kind of one of many out there, it wasn't a big deal, still, was begging for a receptionist job when I got out of college, sort of thing. So, that was life. Wasn't anything spectacularly different, just a normal upbringing.
And growing up in Ireland, was Lyme disease ever talked about anywhere, or ticks or anything of that sort?
Nope.
So
never heard of it before.
So when you got to Georgia, was that the first time you ever had heard about it, or even then?
So I left Ireland. I'm going to be 50 in November. And I left Ireland when I was 24. And I moved to the Cayman Islands for 6 years. So I was there till I was almost 30. And I honestly don't know when I was bitten. I look back now. I mean, there's no deer in the Cayman Islands. Mm-hmm. I didn't really have health issues when I was younger. So I had mild anxiety. But I think, I don't know for sure when I got bitten. And, I look back now, and there's various moments in my life that I'm like, I wonder, was that? Yeah. So actually, it was, you're right, it was in Georgia, because I'd been sick for a long time, and it was in Georgia that I was diagnosed by a functional doctor. But I didn't know anything about it. It was a name that sort of floated around, but I didn't know how or why or what the ins and outs of Lyme disease were at all.
I don't think anyone does until you truly get it, as we know. But so let's go back for a second. And what were your first symptoms, and when did that all begin?
Well, it's a good question, because I look back in 2002, I had what I call my little mental breakdown, where all of a sudden, it was almost like overnight, I just got really, really depressed, really anxious, and I think slightly psychotic. And I actually couldn't work for like a year. And I thought they kept telling me, oh, you're depressed, you've got anxiety. And I completely fell apart because all of a sudden my brain stopped working. So that scared the absolute shit out of me because I was like, this is my brain has just been the thing. Like that's always been, my little weapon. And I'm not saying I'm a genius by any means, but like I always felt like confident enough in my brain. Like I was fine. I'd remember stuff. I always felt like I can learn stuff no matter what challenge I get. Like I'll be able to learn it and apply it like in a job or whatever. So, but I was living in the Caymans at the time, and I had traveled outside of the Caymans off and on with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, to Canada. So now I look back and I'm like, did I get bitten in Canada? Because we used to be outside running. His family were from the countryside, and we'd be out running in the grass in our bare feet and having water fights in the summer and stuff like that. And yes, I was 30 when I was doing that. I
Hey,
sound like
do it while you can.
So it's possible I got bitten on one of my many trips there. And then because there's I don't think there's any, I shouldn't say this because I know we're not supposed to say there isn't Lyme in certain spots, but I don't really believe there is any Lyme in Cayman. There's no deer. I know there's mosquitoes, so maybe they bring it in now. But so I don't know, but I had this situation and I was told, it's all in your head. So I went even further down the rabbit hole of depression because I'm like, you're mad. You're totally nuts. What's wrong with you? Get yourself together. And when I couldn't work, that was like something that changed me forever because I'm like, you can actually not work. You can't think straight. You can't work. You can't go into work because everybody can see that you're nuts. And that really was something that shifted like my confidence in a big, big way. Like I really lost a good part of myself during that time. But I did get better in a way. I was taking antidepressants, I was doing counseling, and I managed to start working again about a year later, but I still just never felt myself. So that was, I think that was around 2002 when that all went down, and then went on to get married and everything was a lot better. And I was okay. And then I had my daughter in 2007, but I moved to New Jersey in 2006. And I kind of think that this is possibly where I got bitten, but then based on my weird experience in 2002, I'm not sure. That might be just a completely separate episode that maybe I just lost it, So in 2007, 2006, I moved to New Jersey, and I used to take my little dog out into this like forest in back of our house and sit on a tree stump and watch him run around. And I was pregnant at the time. And because I am not an outdoorsy girl.
Same.
I don't go camping. I don't dream of hiking. I just don't. Like, I just don't do any of that stuff. So it's like, how the hell did this happen to me? So that's one of the things I thought about, because you're in New Jersey, of course, which is pretty prevalent. Lyme is pretty prevalent there. And then I had my dog, who could have brought it in on him, and it was always sleeping in my bed. But I was also out there in the back with him, watching him run around, sitting on tree stumps and walking through God knows what. So, my pregnancy was kind of tough, which also could have been from Lyme. I don't know.
Yep.
But not outrageously tough. So I had my daughter, and I was just exhausted. But you have a baby, and then I think a couple of years later, we went back to Cayman for a visit.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been having lots of jaw pain, so I was like taking a leave or Tylenol or something, like it was going out of fashion. I was like popping them like crazy. And when I got to Cayman, I was not in good shape. I was like really dizzy, really sick to my stomach. The jaw pain was terrible. So I go to the doctors there. I'm staying with friends of mine who think I'm nuts because I didn't want to leave the house because I was dizzy. So then I start thinking I'm going nuts again. I'm having an episode of craziness. The doctors are like, oh, this is all in your head. You've been taking those pain medicines. That's why your stomach is upset. But I couldn't. I remember in her neighborhood, she had all these speed ramps. And every time we went over one, I was like, oh, God, I'm going to puke. So I'm like, there's something wrong with me, you know? And that's kind of where things sort of started a little bit there. And again, I was told it was all anxiety and depression and there's nothing wrong with you. And I didn't have that many aches and pains that I remember. And I just kind of plodded on through. And at this point, I was staying at home with my daughter. I hadn't worked in a while because I couldn't get a visa in the States anyway. I was allowed to stay here because my husband's Canadian. So based on being married to him, I was allowed to stay, but not work. But that worked out because I had the baby and whatnot. So I kind of started going downhill around. So I had my son in 2011, and I remember like not being able to get over that pregnancy, going up the stairs and just being exhausted. And like, this is weird. Like, and I had, well, after my daughter, I worked out a lot. Like I was not like a crazy athletic person in my 20s. After high school, I did a lot of field hockey there, but I would go to the gym like 4 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I couldn't do that after a while. But I'd say when everything sort of came to a head, it was 2013, and I had been sick for a couple of years, but my main symptoms started off with, at that time, terrible, terrible headaches, terrible nausea. I always had jaw pain as well, but I just attributed that to TMJ and, it's no big deal. I'm just grinding my teeth. But I was sort of like unable to move for about 6 weeks, and I wanted to throw up every time I moved. And so went to the neurologist. Of course, they told me that you've got migraines. You're in your 40s now. It's obviously hormonal. You've got migraines. So they gave me migraine medicine. They told me I had vertigo because every time they tried to get me to walk in a straight line, I was like, going to fall over. So anyway, that didn't help. And I started getting myoclonic movements, like little jumps. And I recognized them because my brother has epilepsy and he used to get them a lot. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this? So during that time as well, I started drinking more and more and more. And I was always a bit of a binge drinker, anyway, but I was drinking way too much. It sort of slowly got worse and worse and worse. So I actually saw quite an impressive neurologist, just your regular mainstream neurologist. And luckily enough, she was open-minded and said to me, I don't know what this is, because we've done an MRI, we've done an EEG. Have you ever thought about going to a functional doctor? And she actually sat in her office and Googled it, somebody near me. She's like, why don't you try this lady?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So I was like, okay. And I went and I saw her and she ran a bunch of tests, and I go back and she says, you have Hashimoto's. And I'm like, praise Jesus, this is my problem. It's sorted. Okay. This is why I'm dizzy. This is why I gain weight and can't lose it. And this is why I feel like crap all the time. And she's like, but I think there's more to the story. I want to test you for Lyme. And I'm like, oh, okay. So she actually ran like a Labcorp Lyme test on me. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it came back positive. So like, I'm like, yeah, I'm like CDC positive.
Yeah, that's
now, right?
incredible.
Yeah, I'm like, wow. I didn't know what a big deal it was until obviously later. But she didn't test me for any co-infections or anything. So I think she was sort of new in her Lyme journey, treating patients and stuff. Yeah, during that time, like I was in and out of the emergency room. Before I was diagnosed, I was trying to work out with personal trainers, and I would start I remember I worked out with a personal trainer one time, and I'm standing outside the gym talking to him, and I'm like, and he's like, what? And just after our workout, I couldn't speak. and I ended up in the emergency room, and I just tell them I had migraines because I didn't know what it was. But yeah, I started slurring. I got my lovely myoclonic movements that reminded me of my brother growing up. Um, so yeah, it was. I didn't get at the time. The functional doctor put me on antibiotics.
Okay.
So I am not sure. I've been looking back in my medical records, trying to, figure out what I did and when, but I feel like I was on them for about a year and a half, like pulsing them. That might sound long. I'm not sure.
Sarah, before we go into your treatment, can we I just want to step back a little bit and just dig a little bit deeper on some of the things we talked about with Cassidy already, if that's okay? Because so much of what you described, I mean, are classic Lyme symptoms. They're not just autoimmune Hashimoto symptoms. They're not just migraine symptoms. They're not just TMJ symptoms, but yet you were pigeonholed into a lot of these specialty diagnoses, right? Yeah. And even earlier back prior to that, you were basically told it's in your head, you're crazy. And you described the moment where you were out and about, you had extreme dizziness, and they were telling you just it's anxiety, right? Yeah. So what I want to know is, what impact did that have on your relationships, on your relationship with at that point you were a new mom, right? So how did that impact you as a mother and in your relationship with your family and your friends while now dealing with these new struggles that were really, real symptoms, but you're being told, hey, look, it's all in your head, you're crazy. How is that impacting your life?
It was very difficult because, people were trying to help, but they just thought I was not, they thought, well, you've always had a bit of anxiety, so this makes sense, and I didn't know what was going on. So I really thought I was going crazy. And that was, as I said earlier, the worst thing ever. And it's changed me forever because I felt like that was not my superpower, but my only real power was my brain. And I'd always relied on it so much. So that scared the living bejesus out of me when I kind of felt like I lost that. I've lost my mind. And I remember looking in the mirror and looking in my eyes and not recognizing myself. And when I'd go out, I felt like I was floating outside my body. And I was like, what is happening? So with relationships at the time as well, like, well, as a new mom, I was home a lot anyway. And my husband used to travel a lot. But I think he just thought, like, what have I signed up for? Because he was like, all right, so we've only been married a few years. Well, like, he stuck with me when I had my first breakdown. So, but he was convinced it was all, in my head too, because that's what the doctors are telling us. And that's, I was very tired with my daughter. And I don't feel like I had, that I had a sort of a post natal depression, but I definitely felt like out of my own body and kind of like, everything was a little foreign to me. But I was lucky.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's not uncommon. We've interviewed a lot of moms who have told us after they gave birth is when their Lyme symptoms kicked in full force, right? So this is not an uncommon story we're hearing. But yet, because you were a new mom and it's stressful being a mom, I think you were stereotyped a little bit that you're a new mom, you're stressed. It's all in your head. Just get some rest. You can't really be sick. You're just a mom. Just deal with it, right? I mean, that's a lot of what I'm hearing here. And that lasted for about a decade, right? So I wondered for our listeners, let's give some time frame here. You were, I think, early 30s, about 30 when you first became symptomatic, and about 40 when you got diagnosed. So this is almost a decade of being ill before getting a diagnosis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and you mentioned that your husband and you at the time believed it was all in your head. Were you seeing a therapist? Were you taking anything for this, depression, anxiety, whatever they were claiming it was associated with? And was that medication helping you before you found your other diagnoses like Hashimoto's and migraines, et cetera?
It seemed like it wasn't helping me. I kept upping the dose, and things were actually, some stuff was, so I was taking antidepressants and some stuff, really made me worse. At one point I was given Ativan, which I'd been scared of taking before, but that actually helped. But that would make sense, I suppose, now looking back, if I had some other stuff going on, like mast cell stuff, or whatever, which I've been later diagnosed with, like, that calmed my systems down a bit, to keep going. I was lucky. I had a very good friend living in New Jersey who was actually a social worker, and she was just a very calming presence in my life. Like, she believed it was, based on my diagnosis, it was anxiety, but she kind of kept, was almost like a therapist to me in everyday life. So that was amazing. But yeah, I felt really crazy when we went to the Caymans, and I was so looking forward. I hadn't been back there in years, and my daughter was 2, and it was going to be great. We were going to go to the beach, and I couldn't leave the house. And I convinced myself then that I was nuts because, I'm only feeling sick because I'm crazy,
I
And
want
that
to
was
talk about that for a second. Sorry, Sarah, with
Sure.
like when everyone is just telling you it's all in your head, your anxiety, what that does to you and your own relationship with yourself, because we've all been there before when people tell you it's crazy, and the self-doubt and things, and just what did that do to you? I know you said like your brain was your superpower. How do you get through that?
I still haven't. It's still a real big thing in my life. Like, I don't trust my brain. I don't trust myself. I sort of second guess myself. Not only that, but like, as the years have gone on, it takes me a lot longer now to process information. So, I could have read a textbook in my mid-20s, early 30s, and been like, oh, okay, cool. Now I have to read it 5 times to get like a little bit of it. So I've come to terms with it in a way, but it's sad, and it made me lose an awful lot of confidence in myself. So I'll be having a conversation with somebody. I spend my whole time apologizing. Oh, I probably sound like I'm all over the place. I'm sorry, or I'm on the phone booking a flight, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, my brain doesn't work like it used, so I'm always making excuses for myself. So I've lost confidence that way.
But Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt again, Sarah, but I have to ask, you wouldn't have been on this podcast a year or 2 ago, correct? I mean, we talked offline a little bit, and you're like, hey, look, I'm somebody helping people in the shadows, but here you are on a public podcast. It's going to be heard by thousands and thousands of people in the first week it launches. So I have to argue that there is some improvement you've made in your cognitive abilities and your confidence, because here you are today, right?
I know. Well, I would say that some of that has happened in the last couple of years, maybe. With my most recent treatments, maybe. But I still, I kind of, in this situation, I just sort of was like, it was something that was an opportunity was offered to me. And I'm like, you know what? You're just going to do it. Like, so what if you sound like an idiot? Maybe
Sarah,
somebody.
but see, you're not though, right? So that's the thing. I think, and I think this is a really important topic to what Cassidy was asking there. You are not sounding like an idiot at all. You are very well spoken. You are very well educated. And you're doing a great job already. And we just started the podcast. But I think so much of this is we have trauma from when we were so sick. And that trauma forces us to believe that we're still in that cognitive place where we are not able to communicate. But that's not the case anymore, right? But you were brave enough to come on here. So I guess the question that I want to kind of follow up with on Cassidy's question is, how have you been able to work on your mind and the way you think about yourself to get the courage to come on this podcast? Because you have made improvements, obviously. How are you overcoming that trauma to take steps forward, to continue to heal, advance your mind, and take, these scary steps forward to do things like this podcast?
I don't know. I should be doing a lot more, because I keep telling myself, oh, you need to get a therapist. You need to do this. You need to, one of the things I've done in the last year, which I didn't think I would do something like this, but I got on Instagram and I started doing fashion stuff on Instagram because I can't go to work. So, and that has given me some confidence for sure. I'm basically in an age group of ladies, who are all like in their late 40s, 50s, and everybody's like, you're amazing, you're awesome, thanks for sharing your outfit, and it's just like everybody boosts each other up. So I'm like, well, if I can do that, and if I can kind of, be quite vulnerable, and I've talked about a little bit about my Lyme journey on there and some of the stuff with my daughter. So I think that's helped me a little bit with my confidence. I also had to, back in 2016, I gave up drinking because I was like, essentially became an alcoholic. And, some of the stuff I've been through with that has helped me sort of like, well, I could be dead, So why not? Or I've had my ups and downs with suicidal ideation over the years too. So sometimes I'm like, well, if I'm feeling really anxious about something or really nervous, again, I do is it going to kill me? No. Like my immediate reaction is to sort of like, no, I don't have the confidence to do that. And then I think some of my experiences in the last few years with Instagram and going to things like AA and meeting other fabulous women and stuff like that has helped me a little bit. And then I've got a really good doctor now as well, who also is like, you're not crazy. Yes, you're making sense to me right now. Because I'm like, does that make sense? So
we're going to get to your doctor today, Sarah, and I know we're bouncing around chronologically, but I think it was important to focus on we asked you to do this, the improvements you made and how you got to where you are today, right? And that was, you answered that very well, but to kind of bounce back now, right? So 30 to 40, you're undiagnosed, you're dealing with all this illness, and you finally get diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Thank God your neurologist thought a functional doctor, because you had too many symptoms that were full body symptoms that were, from neurological to psychological to, all kinds of different things that were going on in your body, hormones, etc. So when you got diagnosed with Hashimoto's, immediately your functional medicine doctor said, hey, I want to run a Lyme test also because there's more here. Or was that after some period of time?
That was immediately the day I went in for my results. She's like, yeah. And I was like, yay, this is it. And she's like, well, I don't think this is just the whole story. So, so that's why she did it. And when she diagnosed me, I literally probably read one Google page about Lyme disease. And I was like, oh, okay. Put me on antibiotics. I started feeling better. And I never did any research into it because sometimes I like to bury my head in the sand a little bit. So I just was like, okay, great. And I was feeling better with the antibiotics. So I was like, all right, so this is the answer to my story. I feel better. Things are, looking up. So it's okay. So I didn't know anything about co-infections or any of the other fun stuff that comes along with Lyme. Like I just thought, oh, Hashimoto's, Lyme, two separate entities. I didn't even realize at the time. And TMJ over there and, craziness over here.
How long was it before you started to feel better? You said you felt a little bit better on the antibiotics.
Yeah, definitely started feeling better. And then I feel like I was on them for about a year and a half. And she had me on other supplements, like I had adrenal issues. And so she also told me I had the MTHFR thing.
And you were pulsing, correct? Different antibiotics. So this was different antibiotics on and off for the course of a year and a half, right?
I believe so.
Okay.
And then she decided to take me off the antibiotics and change me over to herbals. So it was like Cemento and Banderol she got me started on. And I could never get beyond one drop of either one of them. I would herx like crazy. And I hadn't really, not that I could remember herxed before. I probably was sick on and off, but just didn't really think too much of it because it wasn't as bad as it had been before when I was doing the antibiotics. But I could not cope with the herbals. And I was in her office like every other week looking for a glutathione drip because I'm like, I'm dying. And I felt rotten. So then this is weirdly enough, my husband's auntie is from Vancouver and she knew of a lady, and it's one of these, knew of somebody who knew somebody, but actually it was more straight from the horse's mouth. She got me on the phone with a woman in Vancouver who had been cured of Lyme and had been like, her organs had been failing before that. So she hooked me up. I went to Vancouver and I met with a homeopathic doctor who at the time had a different type of device. It was a frequency device, but you might have heard of this along the way since, that has transferred to a thing called, their website is FREemedica.com, and it's a wearable device. But back in those days, he was back in the back end in this kind of dumpy office in the back end of a Whole Food store, like a natural store. And he had like little energy things, like he would tap on your fingers. And I'm like, if this woman hadn't told me like it worked for me, I would be like, what am I doing here? And I brought my son with me at the time. gosh, when was this? 2015. So he's 12 now. But my son had been diagnosed with autism at the age of 18 months. Yeah, so I thought he's got it. He's got to have it, and they tested him energetically and said, yeah, he has it. So anyway, this at the time it was a little light box. So he rented it to me, and I took it home for 3 weeks, and I took drops and other supplements, and I did this thing for 3 weeks, and I felt great for like a year and a half.
So I'm going to stop you there because we're talking about the FREmedica WAVE 1. I have so many questions about that, but I'm going to back up again because I just love asking more questions about things that you said already, because you're giving us so much great information that I need to just ask you a little more, right? So just for context, so at this point in 2015 is when you made the pivot from your functional medical doctor to this homeopathic doctor.
Yeah.
How many children do you have? Is it just, can you walk us through, and how old were they at this point?
Okay, so at 2015, my daughter was 8 and my son was, oh my gosh, 4.
Okay. And now you mentioned that your husband was very supportive for your first breakdown. When was your first breakdown? Was it prior to 2015?
Yeah, when I was 30, so it was about 2002. And honestly, to this day, I still don't know if it's a completely separate situation or, if that's when the problems were really beginning. Because where I was in Cayman and how did I get it, it just would have been difficult. It's always made.
I believe, Sarah, that it was very much related. I mean, that's, we hear this all the time. So I see Cassie shaking her head.
So what you're telling me is I'm not crazy.
No, Sarah, you are 100% not crazy. And I think that I am not a medical professional, but I am a Lyme disease professional. And I believe that you most likely probably got it at some point during your youth. And like me, it manifested in your body for years, and something, stressful activities or something can just trigger it, which is why, like Matt was saying, a lot of women that have Lyme and get pregnant and have children, they get really sick afterwards because of the stress on your body. So something in 2002 probably stressed your system, caused it to come out. It flared for a little bit, and then something settled it down. And then once you had your daughter, everything just spiraled from there. But you are not crazy.
Yeah, it's so interesting because we had decided to move from the Caymans to North Carolina during that time, and everybody was like, oh, look, it's the change. If you're nervous about change, you're nervous about moving country. And I'm like, no, because that stuff used to be like oxygen to me. I love change. I love doing new things. So I'm like, I'm not nervous. I'm excited. I want to get out of here. I want to do this thing, And, I was moving there with my boyfriend. Everything was looking positive for the future. It was a pretty serious relationship, which it did end up being, we did end up getting married. So it was all very exciting times. So anyway, it didn't make sense to me. But
Sarah, from that standpoint, though, obviously it was your boyfriend, he became your husband, you had 2 children with this man, and he was supportive at first. Did things work out? Are you still with your husband? How'd that work out?
Yeah, we're still together. Definitely.
So, and
we've definitely had some rough times over the last 10 years, but it's been rough because of the kids' sicknesses too, and mine. And he has a very, very, very demanding job. He travels a lot, so he's gone most weeks, and he. His career is a big deal to him, which is great in some ways. I mean, he can't take time off to help, yet he's gotten to the position in his company where he's like in such a senior position now that we can afford my treatments, so it's sort of like, the same thing for my daughter. He wasn't able to, just take off work when she got sick to travel around the country with us to help her. He took off some time, but he couldn't. But then, it meant that his career developed, and now we can afford for her treatments too. So it's tough.
It's a balance, right?
Yeah.
And Sarah, the reason I'm asking about your husband, I know it's a personal topic, is because so many people in the Lyme community reach out privately to us at Tick Boot Camp and say, I'm married and I'm struggling with Lyme and I think it's going to ruin my marriage. Or I'm feeling well enough and I want to start to get into the dating world again, but I have no confidence and any advice, right? So you have been through a successful marriage despite being so sick and having 2 children that are so sick, right? So what tips would you give our listeners that have helped you sustain a healthy relationship with your husband? Granted, it's never perfect, right? But you're still together. And I have to tell you, it's really rare for people to stay together through something like you've gone through.
I'm not even going to say listeners. I'm going to say for Cassidy as well, because that just made me very happy too, because you don't hear that a lot, as Matt was saying.
It is hard. And we've both made big mistakes, and he knows he hasn't always been the most supportive, because he thought that in the beginning, when we didn't know what it was, he thought I was putting it on and I was exaggerating, and that it wasn't, or that it can't be as bad as you're making it out to be. Like, just get out of bed. Like, what is the problem? There's nothing wrong. Like, you go to the doctors, they tell you there's nothing wrong with you. So we definitely have had our arguments and talked about it. And what I think was a big eye-opener for him was COVID, because he was home. He had to work from home. So what would happen is before that, because basically after my FREmedica episode and I was feeling good for a couple of years, I started going back downhill again. And all I kept saying was like, oh, I'm just getting migraines, like seriously in denial. Like, and at this time, my daughter got very sick, which I can tell you about in a few minutes. So I was like really, really busy with that. So my husband would come home at the weekends and I'd be in the bed, like, and he'd be doing the laundry and being like, and I couldn't be around food because I'd start heaving and I couldn't feed the kids. And he's like, what the hell? So he also went through this episode with me where I was drinking way too much. So he had to deal with that. So he was looking after the kids because I was drinking too much. And then I stopped drinking, but then I'm still sick all the time, because he thought a lot of this sickness was possibly related to me being, drinking too much, and a lot of my myoclonic movements and stuff like that. He just thought, not necessarily that was the cause, but it definitely wasn't helping. During COVID, he stayed home and he saw the me that was productive on certain days and able to do things and feed the kids. And then he saw the me that was in bed for a few days. So I think he saw more whole picture of, instead of just coming home at the weekends and seeing my lazy butt in bed, he sort of was like, oh, okay, so I see the ups and downs. Like, and we never talked about it, but I really think that helped, because then he became a little bit more open to other treatments, and or he was just beaten down by that point and was like, just take my money. I don't care. Go get yourself any treatment in the world you want with any witch doctor, because I'm over it. So it's one of those.
But Sarah, even pre-COVID, right? I mean, you just described, you painted a picture here of your husband is working all the time to support your family and support you. And he's thinking that it's all in your head. He's thinking B, you're an alcoholic. And he's thinking C, he's your caretaker. Your relationship would not have sustained that if there weren't some things you did, like communication, or, what was there? What was the glue that held your relationship together through the hardest parts of your journey? Was it open and honest communication? Was it him seeing things? Was it him getting a therapist? I feel like there's got to be something there that you did to keep this together, because under no normal circumstances would that relationship would have continued to work with all of those things going on without some effort on your part.
It's really hard. I think that when I got sober, I probably became a little bit more open-minded in, like, let's see it from his point of view. And, when I was younger, I always sort of like fought to win. I'm going to have this argument because I want to win it. Whereas I think I was a little bit better when you go to somewhere like AA and they teach you, like, AA should be for everybody. Honestly, it's amazing. It's such an amazing program. But they teach you how to be a better person, not just to be a sober person, but like how to be sort of more truthful in your life and how to live a better life. So I did definitely learn some tools that way. And instead of like lunging at him verbally or whatever, I would try to be a bit calmer about things. So I do think that helped, but I think we were actually in such a crisis for so long that there was no option for us to go separate ways either. Like we were just holding our shit together for so long, with especially when our daughter got sick. That was a very serious situation. So there was no other option.
But Sarah, I'm going to disagree with that, because we've interviewed guests that their spouse, their husband or wife, have left when they were the sickest and their children were sick because they just couldn't handle it anymore. So there was glue there, and you just described that glue. So I don't want to discredit what you said before. You said, well, he had no choice. No, he had a choice, and we've seen people leave. And I think it's the skills you learned in AA, seeing it through his eyes, being able to communicate. Those are the things that were important that I think helped you get through the hardest time. So thank you for sharing that. I know I was pretty pushy with you on this topic, but I think it's important.
We do definitely are not great with our communication. We could definitely work on that. I feel like I did learn a lot with you know, and I haven't been to AA in years now because of situation with my daughter and COVID and everything. But you know, just some of the basics I learned of just to live your life with honesty, and to try, you know, just try and look at it from another person's point of view. And the decisions you make when you're drinking is just like, you're very selfish, you know? So, but yeah, and I think I figured out, like, you know, there's certain things he can handle and certain things he can't. And it was okay. You know, I would be like, why can't he do this? Why doesn't he do this? And then I just started to learn to accept it. Like each of us have our strengths in a different, and then it's like, well, how would I feel if I had a spouse who was like lying around all the time and sick, and like, oh, you know, it's hard to live with a sick person. It's really hard. I mean, you know, and he was never, it's funny because I was just talking about this with his sister. His sister is here visiting us in Orlando, and her mom, and they were all brought up like that, where, you know, you didn't get sick and you're not nurses. And his mom would come visit, and I'd start heaving in the kitchen because I smelled something. Like I'd walk in and smell something, and she would just like walk right out. She would just like, I'm out. She didn't mention it. She didn't acknowledge it. She didn't. And that's what he's like. People don't get sick. They're from the country in Canada. They're like good stock, you know. His mother used to get up in the freaking ceiling and kill her own rats, like with rat poison, and then drag the bodies out, you know. So they were not sickly people. So I know it's not easy. You know, I now look back on my drinking, and I know that a lot of that was self-medicating from the pain, from so many different reasons, like the actual pain, and then just the madness of having two very sick kids and me being sick, and you know, that kind of stuff. I think I would have always gotten there with my drinking, even if I didn't have Lyme. There's a strong family history, and I was always a big drinker anyway. So
it took a lot of hard work, is what you're saying, on both sides. And I thank you for being so truthful and vulnerable, because we know that's not an easy topic to talk about. So thank you for sharing that. I do though, Sarah, want to ask, you know, before we get to your new doctor, your homeopathic doctor, you mentioned after a year and a half of pulsing antibiotics, you pivoted over to more pure herbs like cemento and banderol. And that's when you had a crazy herx on a small amount. Yeah. And I wonder why. I'm curious if any of your doctors or you have put any thought into this. And, you know, some of my guesses are, if you were just doing antibiotics, there are tick-borne infections and other opportunistic pathogens that aren't addressed by antibiotics alone, right? Like Babesia is not going to be touched by an antibiotic, and that's a bloodborne pathogen from a tick bite. You can have other viruses that aren't going to be addressed by antibiotics. But cemento and banderol are more broad spectrum herbal anti-everything, right? They address viruses, they address pathogen, parasites, they address bacteria. So do you think that you had other things going on, you know, co-infections, et cetera, that the cemento and banderol was finally hitting, and you were so sensitive because they were just sort of, you know, flourishing for a year and a half while you were just treating with antibiotics?
I think that's probably very true. Because I hadn't been tested for other stuff. Like I had things like HHV6, and I had like Epstein-Barr show up as like IgGs, and I had like a bunch of stuff that showed up, but we never tested me for Babesia and Bartonella, and or other tick-borne stuff. And I never actually tested with any other labs other than my Labcorp with this first doctor. She just, you know, because I showed up as positive on a, you know, CDC positive, so to speak, that was it. You're positive. Okay, that's great. Let's treat it. There was no other testing done. And I didn't even know any better for a good few years. So it was only like probably 3 or 4 years ago that I realized I had other stuff going on. And during those years as well, various systems started breaking down where I was beginning to get like, ooh, throat tightening and flushing and what's this? And, you know, other things that were come along with this fun Lyme journey, like mast cell, you know, suspected mast cell activation syndrome. You know, one doctor was like, oh yeah, sure, you have Lyme seizures, you know, definitely. So actually, so about before this, my current doctor, I'm popping around again, haven't I?
You good.
I did see a doctor a few years ago who went back to the traditional stuff of, well, she knew I did test positive at that point for Babesia and Bartonella. So we did a lot of antivirals and antibiotics and la-di-da-di-da. Like she did a whole bunch of stuff with me. Let me see if I can find it here, like Malarone, Zithromax, Dapsone, Plaquenil, methylene blue, all these fun things. And I wasn't getting better then. And she had me on, she was great actually, because we just spoke over Zoom and she was very free with her diagnoses. So she just got me on mast cell stuff, like without running tests. And she just gave me Lamictal, which really helped in calming down my myoclonic movements. But I was not getting better with her at all.
Sarah, before you go on from there, I'm gonna reverse again, because that's what I do. I like to go deeper, you know. So so when you went to the homeopathic doctor in Vancouver after you left your first functional doctor, let's talk more about what you did there, because that was from 2015 to 2016. So just again, to zoom back out, we've been talking about a lot here. From 2013 to 2015, you were doing antibiotics and a little bit of herbs with this functional doctor. Then you pivoted to your homeopathic doctor in Vancouver, and that's where you were exposed to energy testing and things like the FREmedica WAVE device, which was used by Yolanda Hadid, has had great success with the WAVE 1 device. And that's, you know, very popular in the Lyme community because of that. So walk us through the FREmedica WAVE 1 device. It's a wearable device. It uses, you know, frequency. Did it help? You know, and also you mentioned like it's kind of woo-woo, right? It's like energy. What's that? You know, frequency, what's that? What made you be open to trying something like this? And did it help you?
Yeah, well, just because I spoke to a lady who was a trusted friend of the family who had done it. And my auntie had seen how sick she had been. Like she was nearly dead. She's like, oh, and she did this thing and it was great. Here's the phone, talk to her. So that's why I did it. And that's why I think as well, my husband sometimes needs to hear things from a third party rather than me. And then he'll be more on board. Whereas I come home and I'm like, well, there's this thing where if I stand on my head, right, and if I shake my legs a lot, I'll be cured. And he's like, oh my God, here we go again. So, so when I spoke to her, and it was actually a very simple process, because there wasn't like, for years, you're going to have to take this. It was only like drops and this thing for 3 weeks. And it was just this little box I rented from him at the time. But as time moved on, they started making it a wearable. And I did eventually buy the wearable as well. So I have that. I do have it. But when I was really sick for a few years, I kept forgetting to wear it. So I wasn't using it. And then I sort of did if I got sick again, maybe it doesn't work. So I kind of tend to be a bit like, I'll try this. And if this doesn't work, then I'll try this, rather than, it's okay to try a few different things at the same time. And maybe each one of them will have their own benefit,
Right. And that's truly what it is. I believe collectively, it's all the things that you've done that are going to help you get to where you are today, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like though the WAVE 1 device was helpful. You felt a little bit better, but then you started to feel bad again. And you said, it must have not done its job. Let me move on to the next thing. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Which was kind of silly.
No, but I mean, look, then you went on to the next thing. And again, it was a part of your healing journey, and it was a helpful part of your healing journey. So then obviously you went to this other doctor who found other co-infections and just clinically diagnosed you with co-infections and mast cell activation syndrome, and gave you all kinds of things like methylene blue and Dapsone, which are very common treatments in the Lyme community as well. Double Dapsone, Dr. Horowitz, really coined that many years ago. Methylene blue is very commonly used by a lot of doctors as well. And you said that none of these things really helped you though, right? Which so you did all these things and
kept
you're sort
getting
of like,
sicker.
ugh.
Yeah. And I never know if I'm herxing or if I'm flaring. Like, I don't know who can figure that stuff out, because I don't. I'm like, what is happening? Should I be in an Epsom salt bath, or what should I be doing? I never know. Like, I'm like, what is this? But so yeah, I did go to that particular doctor, and she was amazing. Like, she was lovely, but it wasn't working. And then I heard of somebody who had tried SOT.
Wait, before we go there, Sarah, Cassidy, do you have a question? I saw you put your hand up. I just want to make sure Cassidy can jump in.
I did. Sorry. Going back. So just so I have it straight, you have Babesia and Bartonella were the only two co-infections that you have tested positive for, along with like Epstein-Barr and things. Were you ever on Mepron for the Babesia, the yellow paint?
I'm looking at my notes here.
The yellow paint is what I like to call it, the liquid, and it stains all of your clothing. And yes.
No, I don't think so. I don't see that on my list of things. It's possible.
It's possible, yes. That is what I hear from most people for Babesia is the Mepron one. So I didn't hear it on the list. So I was just wondering. But and going back to your herxing thing, I think that is something that a lot of people don't understand is herx reactions. And it is just like over time you kind of figure it out. But it is so hard, especially when you have all of the different illnesses coming at you. So you're like, oh, is this Lyme? Is this the Babesia? Is this the Bartonella? Could this be the Epstein-Barr? Is this the mast cell? Oh, wait, is this a herx? Is this the flare? And it's so hard to differentiate. And like being a woman also, all the hormonal issues that come into play as well, and having to figure out what is actually causing which symptom is really hard. So don't beat yourself up about not being able to determine the difference.
And I say then it's like my husband thinks I'm onto the new thing, every few months. I'm like, so maybe mast cell is my problem. Maybe this is what's causing all of my symptoms.
My first ever, well, not my first ever, my like first ever Lyme doctor that got me better the first time, she had the best thing, and she said it's an onion. Lyme disease is an onion, and you have to peel it back layer by layer. So you do go that way. You're like, okay, we got a handle on the Lyme. Now the Babesia symptoms are going to flare. We're going to have to work on the Babesia. Then the Lyme may come back, and you have to keep peeling different layers and layers and layers and slow that. But that's kind of how you have to do it, because the bacteria, they're tricky little ones, and they will just pop up when
bastards.
You're ready. Yes.
It's my language, but I'm like, fuckers. Sorry.
But Sarah, even with the Hashimoto's, right? The Hashimoto's is an autoimmune disease, and MCAS is this inflammatory response to mast cells. And I believe that they're very, these autoimmune complications due to tick-borne illness are very much connected to mast cell activation syndrome. And I can tell you in my own personal experience, and those of many of our guests, as we treat the whole body, and as we do things to repair our gut health, our immune system, and also obviously kill the Lyme, the Babesia, the co-infections, and address the viruses, my autoimmune levels have dropped significantly, and my sensitivities, my MCAS symptoms have dropped significantly as well. And that's very common with many people we interview. So they're all related, right? As Cassidy said, it's that onion, but it's not like mast cell is causing everything, or even Lyme. We say Lyme disease, but Lyme is not causing everything either. Lyme is a piece of the puzzle, and we have to address the whole puzzle. And because we're all bio-individual, we have to figure out to the best of our abilities what's going on and address those things. And then when we give our body a fighting chance, we can restore health. That's really at a high level, I think, what it's all about. And I've been there where I've assessed it's just Lyme disease, or, oh, I have Babesia now. It must be Babesia why I'm still sick after all these years. But it's never just that one thing like MCAS or Babesia, right? I mean, that's the realization I think that many of us come to throughout our health journeys.
Yeah, and it's hard because you want it to be just, I just want it to be this thing that I can fix. Can I just fix this, please? I just want it to be over.
But you can fix it, right? I mean, you just have to, it's trial and error, and you've done a lot, Sarah. I mean, we're going to talk about SOT next, but collectively you've done a lot, and you're putting the pieces together, and it's a long journey, but we've seen and interviewed so many people. I mean, look at Cassidy. She's working full time. She's, she just moved into her new apartment. And when we interviewed Cassidy, she was having paralysis and she was really sick, right? So it's possible. I mean, Cassidy's a perfect example of somebody, and you as well, Sarah, obviously, right? We're not there yet in your journey, but you've made so much progress as well that we're going to get to shortly. So Cassidy, did you have something?
No, you're good. I was just going to say, along with what Matt was saying, with how when you have Lyme and your entire immune system is just shot, and so we have all these allergies that come up. You have things that normal healthy people have, like the heavy metals, the MTHFR, and that doesn't affect them. And that is detrimental to our health because of how sickly we are. But as you continue to heal and such, and like for me, for an example, like the last time I took antibiotics, because when I was diagnosed with Crohn's and they were trying to I was having a bad flare and I hated doing antibiotics. I was like, I'm gonna hurt. It was Christmas 2019, and I felt like I was going to die. And since then, I am, like I said earlier offline, I'm like 98% better. I have been working hard for the past 2.5 years. Like, I am here. And last week I had a really bad sinus infection, and I took antibiotics, and a couple of years ago, I would have had like a full-on panic attack and like freaked out, and I took the antibiotics and I'm totally fine because my body is now at the point where it can handle these things. And similarly, like food sensitivities, I now have dairy, I now have sugar, like I'm fine with these things. I used to be so allergic to metals and like earrings that if it wasn't 14 karat gold, even the backing, I would have a reaction. These are $20 sterling silver earrings from like Kohl's, and I can wear all these like your body slowly gets better, and all these things that had been causing so many more issues will slowly start to go down because, like you've been saying, Sarah, you're calming the system down. So you're making these small movements, but all the small improvements, they become the big improvements over time.
Yeah, I hear you. You're right.
So let's talk about SOT. So when you left this doctor who was, treating you with the methylene blue and the dapsone and all that, the MCAS stuff, you then, all right, how did you hear about SOT, and how did you find the doctor who would even, work with SOT? Because it's so hard to find an SOT practitioner here in the States.
Well, I'm like 30 minutes away from one. Like, I'm the Genesis Center. Am I allowed to say that?
Yes, you can say that. Yeah.
So I'm very lucky. So I'd heard, I'm on Facebook and I'm on this Lyme page and that Lyme page, and I'd heard of SOT, but I during this time, so I kind of went on the Lyme's not a real thing, this is all bullshit, I'm sick of this thing. So
wait, you stopped, you believed you didn't have Lyme disease and it wasn't real?
Well,
a lot of us have been there. This is the non-judgmental.
I kind of thought like, oh, if I had a healthy immune system, maybe I could fight. Maybe it's just like I don't know. I kind of went through this like, oh, so I go to a functional doctor and they tell me it's Lyme. I tell them I have a sore big toe and they're like, that's Lyme disease. And I'm like, then I go to the mainstream medicine and they tell me it's freaking anxiety. So like, I'm sick, tired of both of these different, like, you've got one extreme to another, and I'm just over it. And then my daughter got extremely sick with autoimmune encephalitis, and then everybody's saying, oh, that's Lyme. And then I had a girlfriend who traveled to New York with her kid with AE, who was seeing a very prominent Lyme neurologist up there. What's her name again? Can't remember, because we saw her too. And he was doing plasmapheresis every month for like 8 months, and he wasn't getting better. So her and I got our little heads together and we're like, this Lyme shit is bullshit. Like, forget it. Like, it doesn't mean, they're not getting better. We're not getting better. Forget it. So I just kind of went on a little, not so much an anti-Lyme thing, but just like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hear about it. I'm just having migraines. This is what I kind of went into denial for a couple of years. And even with my daughter, I didn't really look into Lyme as much. I mean, I did, and she came back positive on a couple of things, but she was in a serious crisis. Like, we thought she was going to die. So we were trying to do immediate mainstream stuff with her to just try and keep her alive for a while. So yeah, and during that time I was in crisis mode, so I didn't even want to think about Lyme. And I actually somehow survived and kept going. It was when she got a little bit better that I started falling apart again. I think my body was like, oh, now it's time for you.
But you also made progress, right? You did a lot that helped you heal, but you were getting there. Your body was getting better. You were slowly and gradually recovering from chronic illness. You were rebuilding this body that was damaged for so many years, and you had enough strength to get through that crisis, thank God, with your daughter, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it was, I think somehow I managed to go through it and be there and be, because I was up most nights and we were in and out of hospitals and traveling all over the country with her. So I don't know how I did it. And then I think that's when my body just, after, when it sort of, we kind of calmed down a bit, then it was like, haha, your turn.
I think that happens.
Sorry, Cassidy.
I was gonna say, I think that happens a lot with
Yeah.
the Lyme and the like, illnesses and things like that, with your body is in the flight or like fight or flight, and you're just running and running and running on like adrenaline and such. And then when it does have time to calm down, that's when you actually can sit and be like, oh, something is not right here.
Yeah.
And it just all kind of comes tumbling down at once. But like Matt said, you were able to get through that because of the work you had done prior, which is super amazing.
Yeah. And it's weird sticking my fingers in my ears and going la 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 la. It just didn't work. It was
Yep.
kind of weird. I thought that would work, but it didn't. Yeah.
So
yeah.
you found the Genesis Center on these Facebook groups? Is that what you were saying? And then you,
actually, I'd heard of SOT, but it had kind of floated by me on Facebook pages and stuff like that. And it was, I just get overwhelmed. I'm like, I don't want to read about SOT because I'm like reading about, my son has pandas, he has autism, Kira's got AE, probably Lyme. I'm just like, I can't read anymore. So I'd seen SOT and I'd seen like, oh, this is great, but I hadn't gotten into it or read much about it. But my next door neighbor, her kids play baseball with other kids whose dad had been telling her about his journey. And I got on the phone with him one night. Actually, I got my husband on the phone with him one night because again, when he hears it from somebody else, it tends to be better. So he told us his story. Just, he had been in the early days. Well, I don't know exactly where he was, but he was more like fatigue and pains and aches. Like he hadn't gone to like bedridden, couldn't walk, some of the other stuff. But he had a great experience with it. So my husband got off the phone and was like, just do it. Like, so I was like, okay. So that's when I started going to the Genesis Center. So they do vibrant testing. So what's interesting about that is they measure your levels. So it's not just like you're positive for Babesia or you're positive for whatever type of Babesia or Bartonella or Borrelia. It gives you like your numbers, your IgG numbers and your IgM numbers. So they can see as time goes on how your numbers are changing. So I did Borrelia back in what are my dates? I want to say like springtime of 2021. I did an SOT for Borrelia.
What does that mean, Sarah? Just for our listeners who aren't familiar with SOT, when you say you did a Lyme SOT, what does that mean?
So this is going to be, you're going to ask me technical stuff. Damn it. So this is how I describe SOT, which is, and I've heard Kelsey on before, and I'm like, oh, come on. Like, how did she just know that?
Well, it's funny you bring up Kelsey because Kelsey actually is friends with Cassidy, who was part of Cassidy's Lyme support group, and that's how we met them.
That's how I found Cassidy. I feel like I found you guys through Kelsey, finding her on Instagram, or maybe I'd seen a YouTube video of her in SOT, or I somehow found all of you. I don't know how I found you guys, but
small world.
Yeah. But
Kelsey's part of my Lyme encyclopedia group, and you're very right with just the way she can like describe things, and like my brain doesn't work like that.
Mine either anymore, but like, yeah. So I remember you guys were like, you'd asked her, what was her experience with SOT, and she's like, well, SOT is this, and I'm like, this is how I describe SOT. It's that you basically get a positive test for Lyme or some co-infection or some tick-borne illness. And they take your blood. So you have to have a positive test within the past 6 months. They take your blood, they send it to Greece, and they create an antidote. That is my very technical, but it's obviously it's more than that. But it's
that's a really good answer.
Technology. But I'm just like, it's easiest for me to say they create an antidote, and that's about. But it actually changes. It seems to change the DNA of the bacteria in your body. So, for some reason that seems to be more effective, because like antibiotics and stuff like that, they seem to be able to understand or hide from it, or dig into your cells. But because they're changing the DNA of the actual bacteria, it changes their makeup and they just die.
It's targeted. So although antibiotics are more broad spectrum for a wide variety of bacteria, the SOT is very specific to a strain of Borrelia, which is Lyme disease, correct? But it's more precise in targeting and eliminating that Borrelia in your body, right?
And it's for you specifically because it's based on your blood, and they do it for all different co-infections. all different types of Borrelias and all different types of Babesias and Bartonellas. So yeah, it's catered just to your situation and that bacteria that you have.
So what was that like, Sarah? I'm just trying to imagine, like, so you send your blood away to Greece, they develop the antidote to cure your strains of Borrelia burgdorferi, and now you get this injected back into you. Like, did you feel anything immediately while getting this injection? You know, when, if ever, did you feel any response to this?
I felt it took about 3 weeks and I started feeling a little bit better, but then something fun happened and it was my Babesia went nuts. So
the onion, right?
Yep, I was gonna say it's the onion popping back.
Well, they thought it was Bartonella first, and but Babesia, it seems to be now a year on, is the problem, and I'm still having issues, but you know, sometimes when you get sick and you're in it and you're like, this sucks and I'm always sick, and you forget that you've had some good days. Or I'm the opposite as well. I will have a good day and I feel like I've never been sick before. This is fabulous. You know, I get complete like Lyme amnesia. I'm like, I'm fine. Like, I don't know what the fuss is. So, but my husband is like, no. Overall, you're doing a lot better. I can see a big difference. So I'm going off of that because I'm not very good at journaling or keeping track. At one point, I downloaded a migraine app onto my phone and I did track because I have a lot of things in there that are limey, you know, like nausea, headaches, and you can add stuff into this particular migraine app. So I tracked it for a couple of years, and which is I should be doing, but I was able to see like I was spending 14-ish days of the month in bed. And you know, so I could see it getting worse and worse and worse. And I was like, damn it, you know, this is not just migraines. So not that migraines are just migraines, but you know, at this stage in my life, I believe that, you know, you don't just get migraines, that there's got to be something else, you know, causing these things. But yeah, so it was, yeah, I was just like, just give me this stuff. I'll take whatever you're dishing out if it's going to make things work or better.
So you got the Borrelia SOT, you were good for a little bit, and then the Bartonella kicked in. So then you got a Bartonella SOT shortly after. Is that what happened?
Well, I didn't do the Bartonella. Well, we didn't do the Bartonella SOT. We started doing oral stuff again. So she's done a couple more rounds of oral stuff with Babesia for me because I keep saying, you know, I keep like, I don't want to have to fork out another $4,000 for a SOT. And in the meantime, my daughter has had one too. So I'm pretty sure my son is going to need one at least. So we're trying to like divvy out the SOTs, like who's going to get one. And so I just spoke to my doctor last week and my Babesia numbers are looking somewhat better, but we're doing another round of stuff. And basically there's a good chance in a couple of months I'll be doing a Babesia SOT because it's just not seeming to want to shift. And of course I spoke to my doctor last week and in that week, I'd had the best 3 weeks I can ever remember. Like crazy stuff. We bought this house in Orlando and we're doing it up for short-term rentals. I painted for 8 hours one day.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
I was like breaking down cardboard boxes. And I mean, I literally typically can't go for a walk around the block. Like I'm scared to because I get sicker when I work out.
Yep.
Or do even the smallest, you know, the whole spoon theory thing. Like I'll be like, I'm afraid to take the garbage out in case that puts me into a flare. But then, of course, Monday, I've been sick all this week, weirdly enough. But I started taking Dr. Rawls supplements about a month ago, and I've been slowly increasing them. I've also started doing my FREmedica again. So I'm trying to figure out if I pushed it too far on one or the other.
Could be herxing, right? I mean, this could be a fluff, so it's possible.
Yeah. Yesterday was rough, but I tried to do the slow introduction with Dr. Rawls stuff, but you know, I feel pretty confident in the SOT, but I also thought, you know, I'd listen to Dr. Rawls on your podcast, and I'm like, well, it's about, you know, modulating the immune system, it's herbs, so it's not like it's going to hurt me. It's not saying I don't believe in my SOT. It's just going to help me to have a stronger immune system.
Well, kind of what Matt was saying earlier with like you kind of have to do a whole bunch of things, and you end like there's not I've been in this journey now for 10 years, and I think that I would not be where I am if I didn't do everything that I did. Like everything helped in some sort of fashion, and kind of still doing things. And I still do like I'm a big food person. So like my food is my medicine now. I'm with the herbs and things, but
I'm really bad about my food.
We can chat offline about that.
God. I know what I should do. I'm just like a 12-year-old kid.
It takes a while to get there. But I want to backtrack for a second, if we can, and talk about, so you mentioned how the SOTs are each about $4,000. And I want to know, I have two questions along this lining with, one, if you had to ballpark it, how much have you spent on your health on this journey? And then two, what does that, like the cost of this, because obviously like not covered by insurance, pretty much anything, all the supplements you have to pay out of pocket and such like that, the SOT, what does that do with having to pay for you and your children? Like, how does that impact your family, like your family finances, your relationships and things like that? And like, I know at least for me, I always felt so guilty because I couldn't be helping pay for these treatments because I was so sick. So
it's really hard. The guilt and the shame that come along with this illness are almost crippling. And I feel like I'm always trying to prove myself. Like, since we were here and I was actually able to help my husband with things, I'm like, did you notice? Did you see the way I was able to do that? And he's like, yeah. And I'm trying to like, see, I'm not a lazy person, I promise. So over the years, we have definitely gone into lots of credit card debt for various treatments. You know, at first, when I thought the only problem we had was autism, I was taking my son to lots of biomedical doctors. So that was something that was out of pocket. And my husband was like, oh, for God's sake. And he grew up in Canada where everything's free. And most Canadians love the health system up there. Like, there's very few that you'll find. I've seen both, and I'm not crazy about the Canadian health system, but, you know, you get spoiled in some ways down here. Obviously, it costs a fortune, but you don't have to wait 6 months to get into something. But so he's used to like really great free education and really great free healthcare. So there's me with this 2-year-old autistic kid saying we need to pay, $200 every week for speech therapy, or we need to do this, or we need to go to the biomedical doctor. And so that started that. And so since then, all of a sudden I'm coming back with all these newfangled things for one of the kids or me. So if I don't know for sure, I would guess for me $30,000 to $40,000. At one point we were paying, we did this medication with my daughter called Rituxan, and we had to pay 35 grand, put it on our credit card for her. We were very lucky we got it back with our health insurance company, and we were doing IVIG monthly for her for 3 years, and that's 25 grand each time, but we were covered. We were paying 10 grand, 15 grand deductibles every year. So, but I know a lot of people in the AE, autoimmune encephalitis community, who don't get it covered and are paying out of pocket, like remortgaging their homes. And again, you don't know if the treatment's going to work. So we've been kind of lucky with that side of things, the mainstream side for her. But yeah, so, again, I feel like I'm one of the lucky ones in a lot of ways. Like I feel like I didn't go for too long without a diagnosis. Although I know we just talked about
it was 10 years.
I know.
Come on, Sarah. That wasn't too long. Only a decade.
Stories of 30 years, right? And I feel like I've been very sick, bedridden and stuff like that, but I haven't like been paralyzed. I haven't been in a wheelchair. I haven't, stuff like that. So, and I haven't had to remortgage my home or lose my home. And I've been lucky that my husband has a job that we've been able to afford some of these things. But, we did put ourselves into a lot of credit card debt over the years. So we're constantly paying off, it's just a lot. Yeah. It's a lot of medical bills. That is just, it's irritating and annoying.
100% agree.
Yeah.
It's insane, and it's just
Yeah.
sickening and maddening how much we have to pay just
Especially,
to live.
yeah, like for you as well, like you're just sort of starting out, and I think it's weird in America, everybody starts out with this huge student debt, as well, and then you've got medical debt and student debt, and
Oh yeah.
I feel like 22-year-olds should be able to just like launch into their lives and start getting their paycheck and being like, yay, now I can rent a house, or now I can buy this and get a car and do fun things instead of paying bills.
Yep. It took me a while to get to feel confident enough to be able to move and live on my own, because I was spending $1,000 a month on my medical bills alone. I'm like, that's rent. I spend rent like on my medical bills, and like while people my age are out having to they spending money on like drinks or clothes or whatever, like vacations, I'm like, I have to make sure I have enough money to go to the doctor and to buy my medicines that I'm going to need to survive. So I can't imagine when there's 3 of you at the same time. It's just, and I want to talk about that. You've mentioned both of your children having illnesses. So I wanted to see if you can tell me a little bit about like because your daughter's older, so I would assume hers kind of started first.
Well, I was a little bit kind of, I didn't really notice hers because when my son Finn got diagnosed with autism, I was all like, I'm gonna cure this. And we were taking him to this doctor and that doctor and the other doctor and trying supplements and whatever. And she was sort of like going downhill along the way. But she presented like a normal kid, no developmental issues. The teachers at school said she was doing great. She was very smart. Everything was good. And I would notice some stuff at home. So I'd say to her teachers, she good. And they're like, no, she's great. She's focused. She's gets on with everybody. So it was
Now, when
about
you said you noticed things at home, what did you notice?
That she did seem to like obsess about certain things, or she lacked some social skills.
Gotcha.
Like she would get very upset with friends in a situation that I thought was a bit weird, or she was like slamming doors and at the age of 5 storming away, and I was like, oh, that's kind of weird. But she didn't see, we were like, maybe it's ADHD, but we just thought there's something different. We're not sure what. And she had her first seizure when she was 4.5. She had a very, very long seizure. And I feel like that was the beginning of some of her stuff. But if I go back and look at it all, it's possible that she got Lyme in utero, and that's been the source of all of the problems. So she basically about 5 years ago, all of a sudden was talking about wanting to kill herself, psychosis, hallucinations. I basically had to sleep in a room for 2 or 3 years. We had to
How old was she at this time?
About 11.
Okay.
We had to lock up all 10, 11. We had to lock up all of our medications and knives and forks, everything in the garage, because she tried to kill me. She tried to kill herself. She would attack me. I used to have just bruises up and down my arms because she'd try and bite me all the time. So we were taking her to, there's like a doctor in DC, Dr. Latimer, who's like the pandas doctor. We thought it was pandas, which is under the same umbrella as AE. But the treatments we did there didn't work. We took her to New York to see Dr. Frid. That's who it is. I was trying to remember earlier. She's like a Lyme neurologist there. And she wanted us to come up every month to do plasmapheresis with her hematologist, but we'd drive Kira to DC in a car, and she would scream and scream and say that the ground was going to open up and swallow us up. And she tried to throw furniture out of hotel room windows, and she tried to jump out of windows and tried to get to the top of the building to jump off the building. And so it was impossible to get her places, and she still to this day won't fly. So she was really sick. And my son at this, in and around the same time had the same sort of symptoms, but not on the same scale. And he was like officially diagnosed with pandas. So that's, from strep. So it's a neuropsychiatric illness, you know, obsessive compulsive disorder, some psychosis, stuff like that. So, but all of these can also go way back to Lyme.
Yep.
So yeah, she likes to, when she's mad at me, she likes to say that it's all my fault because I gave her Lyme.
So have they both been tested for?
Yes. So she, a good few years ago, we did DNA connections, like way back. My son tested negative on everything, and I was like, huh. But again, he was sort of left in the wind while we dealt with her crisis then, and he was okay. You know, he was like going about life. Like he did a lot of school avoidance, some of the pandas stuff, but he was okay. So she tested positive for a couple of things on DNA connections, and we tried antibiotics and just made her worse. And then we sort of gave everything, all of that Lyme stuff up, and just went with IVIG, which also can be a treatment for Lyme anyway. So she was getting better on that, which is possible that because it's Lyme, you know. So she's still very sick, but she's kind of in, you know, middle of the road mode. She hasn't been to school in 4 years. Still a lot of OCD and psychosis, not psychosis, but more like paranoia and stuff like that. So we're still working on that with her. So I have to juggle the mainstream medicine thing and the functional. So she just started seeing my doctor. She did one SOT, but I can't talk to her neurologist about it. You can't mention Lyme because she just rolled her eyes at it. Yep. No way. So I have my functional doctor on one side who's telling me, please don't put her on immune suppressants because that's what her neurologist wants to do. Because the SOT needs her immune system to work. But then I need to keep, if I show up at the hospital tomorrow with my daughter in a psychosis, I need to have somebody there at the hospital who knows her situation and doesn't just lock her up, because she's already been locked up for a week in a psych place. And they don't want to hear about this is medical. It's not, certainly don't want to hear about Lyme. So I need to have that contact in the hospital who believes in autoimmune encephalitis. So I have to kind of make sure, this is what the fun thing is with all of these illnesses, is trying to go into a doctor, trying to play the game, where you're like, oh, right. Okay. That's interesting. Yes, you're giving me new information. And yes, you are the leader in this situation. But at the same time, you're trying to inject things into the conversation so you don't look crazy, because when you have kids, you have to be really scared of them taking your kids away with these things, right? Like they'll say, oh, you're not giving them the antidepressants or the antipsychotics. You know, we must take your child away because that's what we're telling you should do. And we tried all that stuff for her as well. We were open to it and it didn't work, but
so I admire you so much, because I can't even fathom what that is like, because like you said, like they would take your child away, but you, and like knowing deep, because like my mom was my caretaker. She didn't have Lyme, but she was my caretaker, and I know she would kind of go through these phases too. And she, like you were saying, when you just like don't even want to think it's Lyme because of these things, because there is no direct answer. There is no one saying take this and it's a magical medicine and you'll feel better. But something for like autoimmune encephalitis, at least they believe in it. At least the mainstream world believes in it. It will be covered by insurance. You can have these things, but like you said, you have to kind of pick and choose. It kind of feels like we're like in Harry Potter, like you can't say Voldemort. That's how I am with Lyme. Like I am very, very, very careful with when I will say it. And like, I'm terrified to go to the hospital, or I'm not as much anymore because I'm not active, but like I have friends that will call me that with Lyme that are like, I feel like I'm dying. I want to go to the hospital. And I'm like, don't, because they are going to not help you. They're going to put you in a psych ward, like you said, because I had that happen to me. They put me in there and I'm like, no, this is not, I'm not crazy. This is actually something physically going on with me because I have Lyme disease, but they hear Lyme disease and they're like, checked out.
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, you know, and then you talk to, you talk to your friends and family and they hear the same controversy. So they think you're mad and that it's not a real thing. Or how could you be this sick for so long and nobody's helping you if it's a real thing, you know?
Or the traveling across the world and the country to try to find these different
Yeah.
solutions and using SOT, and people are like, what is that? Why can't you just take
And why doesn't
antibiotics?
the
Because
insurance pay for it?
exactly. And but then it's also hard when when you hear from somebody that had acute Lyme and they took 4 weeks of
Yeah,
antibiotics and are totally fine, and your family and friends are like, I don't understand.
yeah,
Why are they fine and you're not fine? And I'm like, well, let me sit you down because it's a long story.
yeah. And it's cut me off from family and friends and stuff because nobody wants to hear you're sick all the time. You know,
Yep.
if you got the flu, you'll say I'm sick, and people are like, "Oh, that sucks." And then 4 days later, they say, "How are you feeling?" "I'm feeling better." But I can't tell them that. And
Yep.
I can tell them in the morning, I feel good, and 2 hours later, I might be in bed, and I
Yep.
can't explain that. And then I might be back out in the evening and chatting and laughing with them because I feel better. But then the next day, it starts again. So they think, they're like, what? Like, since this week, I've had family members visiting, and they're like, "Are you feeling better?" And I'm like, first of all, I don't know.
Yep.
Like, I only woke up half an hour ago, and I honestly don't know. And that you're like, yeah, a little bit better, yeah. And that's what they want to hear. They don't want to hear, so I was explaining to my sister-in-law that I sort of stopped phoning people, and I sort of cut myself off because I don't have anything good to tell people. My
Yep.
daughter's sick, I'm sick, somebody's sick. So
And
it's
it's
not fun
so,
stuff.
like we were talking about earlier, with your connection to yourself, I think, and your lack of confidence and things, because you can't be truthful. And like within that, you're also lying to yourself at the same time. And you're like, oh, I'm fine. But on the inside, it's truly
Yeah,
like everything hurts. I feel like I'm dying. I just want to go back to bed. But
yeah,
like you said, that's not what people want to hear. When people say, how are you? They don't actually they don't want to hear that you're not okay,
yeah,
because then it makes it awkward. And then they have to like kind of act like they know what's going on, when in their head, they're actually like, I have no idea what this
yeah.
is like,
And
and they can't relate.
yeah. And
That's why I think
some of them know about Lyme, like they've had friends or, other experiences with it, but it's still, even other people with Lyme don't always necessarily get your journey, right? Because it's always so
yep,
different.
it's always so different. And that's why I think what you're doing right now and what this whole entire podcast is about is so important, because the more we talk about it and the more we share our stories and how they are all different and
Yeah.
how all the different treatments that everyone goes through, it is bringing it out from the darkness so that people can actually hear it and understand it and be supported. And that's kind of my next question I have for you is, what is, I love when people ask me this question too, but what is like the most surprising thing that Lyme has, like this whole journey has taught you about yourself and just like the world as a whole?
Oh my God.
You can take
Well,
a second.
I think I have my moments of telling myself I'm weak and I'm terrible and I'm useless and I'm obviously lazy, and maybe everybody wakes up feeling like this, but I'm just so weak I can't. But when I stop doing that, I realize I'm actually very strong. Um, and I've been through an awful lot with my kids and myself. And I know other people look at me and possibly think I'm a hypochondriac, or, that this is all mad and nuts and that we're not all as sick as we say we are. But in my heart, I know that we are, and that, and I look at my kids too and realize, well, certainly my daughter, how brave she is and how much she's been through. So I think I'm stronger than I ever imagined I'd have to be. And I also have developed, I feel like I was always empathetic, but now I'm like super duper empathetic to people's situations, and I can understand other people with chronic illness that mightn't have Lyme, but that they can go through the ups and downs in one day. Um, and you can kind of be like, yeah, totally, I get it. I get that you can be out smiling and laughing for an hour and then need to go to bed. And I don't not believe you
Yep.
because of that. Um, I have been very disappointed in people too. You know, I'm sure everybody goes through this, but you lose friends and um, that's hard. The hard part of it. But then you also see who your true friends are as well. Like some, standouts. I mean, I have this friend who lived in the States also, and I met her maybe 10 years ago, and she was around for the beginning of this journey, and always believed me. and always called me even when I never called back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she stuck it out. Like, she didn't give up on me like a lot of the other people did. Not necessarily through fault of their own, but they, you know, if I'm not calling them back, or if I'm not going to the things they're inviting me to, she still kept calling me. So she was always very supportive, you know, saying, no, I can see that you're sick. I can see it. So yeah, so you see, you get, not, don't necessarily last with, you know, all 10 friends, but you see the good in some people, right?
Yes, I totally agree. And I think also with, like you were talking about, the chronic illness community and the Lyme community specifically is so important to have
Yeah,
that support from people that actually know what you are going through.
yeah,
Is just what, I wouldn't be here without people like Matt over here sharing his story and hyping me up as well. And you,
yeah,
Sarah. I think that everyone that listens to this is going to understand what you are going through and see how strong you really are, because I don't think there's anyone that's stronger than chronic illness warriors, because
yeah.
it's not for the faint of
True.
heart.
Yeah, and I see my daughter, you know, she, like you, very young and chronically ill. I mean, she hasn't had a childhood,
Yep.
you know, and it's very difficult. I mean, I couldn't imagine. I know what I was up to, you know, in my teens and 20s when I was young like yourself. Um, and, you know, I definitely lived a good, fun life in those days that I can look back on now, but it's hard for people who are younger too to go through this and to not experience all the fun teenagery 20 something stuff that you should be experiencing without this stupid illness.
Yeah, it's definitely, like I always tell people, that I was forced to grow up way faster than normal people my age are, but
Yeah,
because of that, I have got to experience the bad things, the good things that most people don't get to experience. And like you're talking about, I've discovered how strong I truly am and
yeah.
who the real friends are. And that
Hmm.
is a gift that I am thankful for my Lyme for giving me.
Yeah.
And with that, I have one final question for you, which is,
Hey.
if I was brand new,
Mhm.
just got my diagnosis today, what is the advice that you would give me, Sarah, from all you have learned over this
Oh my
20 year journey that you have been on?
God. God, that's really difficult. Just that it's going to be a marathon. It's going to be, and try not to lose faith, because it's just difficult. I would hope that, you know, it's actually, I wish every newbie had like somebody with 20 years Lyme experience under their belt to talk to, but um you know, and it's okay to change doctors, you know, to try one thing and see that it doesn't work and move on to the next thing, and it's not a failure and you haven't failed, um and you're not crazy to try different things. It's okay, you know. Yes, that didn't work doesn't mean it's the end of the world. Like, because I would have something not work and be like, well, that's it then, you know. And it is hard when you've spent the money on it, but you just have to stop and pick yourself back up. And sometimes it's taken me a year to pick myself back up, and that's okay too. You know what I mean? It's not like, oh, this didn't work and next week I've gone to a different doctor. Sometimes I've just given up, you know, for a long time. So it's okay to go through all the ups and downs, and it's okay to feel sorry for yourself a little bit, and then to rally. um and it's, yeah, it's okay to have those days where you just feel like you're not going to make it, but at the end of the day you're always going to make it. You're going to make it. But so I think it's just, be kind to yourself and know that it's going to take time. um which, you know, nobody really wants to hear that, but that's the truth of it.
Yep.
um just keep plugging away.
I think that is the best advice. And for someone who is pretty much better, that made me feel better
Yeah.
just hearing that, like that, just because, yeah. And I think that that is exactly what everyone needs to learn, and be kind
And
to
don't, I
yourself. And
guess,
it's a
don't
marathon.
wait till you're fully, you don't wait till you're better for your life to start again as well. You know, like even coming on this podcast, I thought, well, I'm not better. Like, I'm still working on it. Am I allowed to be on this podcast? Am I an expert if I'm not better? But, you know, try and enjoy the moments like know your own body and know like, okay, if you're having a good day, yes, I can't go out and run a marathon, but try and enjoy the good moments you do have while taking care of yourself. So that's my advice, I suppose.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for hopping on and sharing your story with us. And
For having me.
I really appreciate you. And I think you are strong and you should have all the confidence in your expertise because you have been living this for 20 years and you're just going to keep on keeping on. Thank you for listening to our Tick Bootcamp interview with our guest, Sarah Corlis. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Sarah, please visit her Instagram at sarah.corlis. Second, if you've enjoyed this episode of the Tick Bootcamp podcast, please share it with your friends on social media. Third, Tick Bootcamp has created a Tick Bite blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com/bite to view the blueprint. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on your podcast platform of your choice. And finally, if you'd like to search our podcast library of over 250 episodes, subscribe to our email list, or share feedback, please visit our website at tickbootcamp.com. Thank you, as always, for listening.